I am really excited to introduce this next episode with Chris Burkard. Chris is a close friend, a mentor to many, including myself, and an absolute legend. His work needs no introduction. World famous adventure photographer, in my opinion, more or less define the genre that we see so popularized on Instagram today, with a portfolio of work that began with cold wave surfing all over the world. Chris and I have had many adventures together, rock climbing adventures, adventures on boats off the coast of Russia, just crazy times all over the place. And we talk a little bit about that, but mostly what we get into is faith, family, and mindset. Chris is LDS, Mormon. Religion is very important to Chris, as is family. We talk about how that came to be, his early childhood, what forces shaped him and his inner life. This is a very genuine and honest conversation, a sort of raw look under the hood of somebody who I think many people are inspired by. I certainly am. And I hope that people listen to this and get just a little bit of perspective on what makes Chris, Chris. And with that, a little bit of levity, a little bit of grace, a little bit of wisdom for how we can all go about our lives, living them to their fullest. So with that, I'll leave it there, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks for doing this, man.
Dude,
Psyched to be here with you.
Awesome, man.
It's been a little while since Iceland.
I see your face all the time because every time I'm doing a slideshow or a presentation, one of the photos that's in there is that one of you in the Kurils. So it's always funny how I don't get a chance to catch up with friends all the time, but they're still like in my periphery, and even like, Renan and Taylor and just people like that. Like I'm kind of always like seeing them and being reminded of projects I did with them or looking at images of them or making a print of it. So it is kind of fascinating, but yeah, I mean, so stoked to be able to take the time and chat and catch up, and nothing better than long form conversation.
That trip was so wild.
It was. It was. I talk about it a lot to people because I get asked like, where's the place you go back to? And or people are like, what's on your bucket list? And I'm like, I don't know how to tell you this, but I've kind of done most of what was on my bucket list. And at this point, all I want to do is go back to the places that really moved me. And the Kurils were one of them. And that whole experience, kind of just the way that it unfolded and unfurled and everything was so surreal. I swear there are times where I'm like, I wish I could have been in the moment more.
I feel that way about that trip especially too, because there was a lot going on too.
There was. Can we cuss in this podcast?
Yeah.
There was a shit ton going on. And even when you and me were like hiking up on that ridge and the most beautiful night I've ever seen and everything, it was still like hectic because we're like, we got to get there by sunset. We got to get the shot. There's drones. There's blah, blah. I'm trying to shoot. You're trying to shoot.
There are all these objectives.
It's stressful, right? And you're never just like, let me just breathe. But you and me, we had that moment up on that ridge when like, because that was the one thing I really wanted to do is I wanted to like hike around that caldera. And we did it. And I remember vividly being like, that's easily the most special place I've stood in my life, for sure.
Me too. I just remember glissading down that huge elephant grass. That was crazy. And the fox, chasing the fox around, the one fox.
Do you remember when we got to the top of the rim of the caldera? And on the far end, we're kind of like, 12 o'clock from our campsite, right? You could see the boat, you could see our camp. And there was almost like this Ainu traditional like dugout thing. Like there was like a hole, depression, and I was just like, oh my God, if we just had more time to like explore this or pick through it or whatever. Cause it was obviously something.
It's like an archaeological site.
Yeah. And I was just like, of course, like this would make sense. This spot right here has like the best visibility, 360 degrees. This would be like a lookout or something like that. And I just thought that was fascinating. There's so many parts to that trip that I wish I could just that could have just stretched out for a couple more hours.
Yeah. People ask me what's the most special place in the world that you've been. I always say the Kurils, and they generally always say, what?
Yeah.
Where? What is that?
Yeah.
It's so crazy that, I mean,
Like
especially...
it's right by Bali. It's great.
Yeah,
You're going to love it.
Yeah. In the context of everything happening with Russia. And we were there with Eugene Kaspersky, a cybersecurity billionaire.
Crazy.
So weird that I feel very fortunate that we got to go there, because who knows with respect to Russia if it'll ever settle back down or not.
And I actually think that, you can go there. I don't think there are limitations for Americans to go there.
Even now,
from what I could be totally wrong. I'm just speaking out of my ass, but I'm pretty sure that you can go there. But I think it's more of like now it's just such a bad PR move in general. Like, why would you want to support a country that's actively, degrading another country? And it's tough because, to me, it's really tough because the Kurils are disputed. They were traditional Japanese indigenous people I knew that owned them, and they were taken over, and they're still disputed. So technically they're not really owned by either, and then you've got Kamchatka, which is like the far east of Russia, which is the wild, wild west.
Bears are 10 times bigger than normal bears.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like...
Mosquitoes are bigger than the bears.
Exactly, and a part of me is just like, whatever's happening in Moscow and this and that, it's got to be so remote and distant from what's happening on those islands. And it bums me out. There's special places on the planet that are kind of hard to go and experience because of things like this.
I think we got turned around in the middle of the night by the Russian Navy.
Yeah.
I reconnected with Pavel 6 months ago.
Yeah, okay.
He said he woke up in the night. I slept through it, but he said he woke up in the night, walked out of the bunk up to the upper deck, and there were spotlights from multiple boats on our boat in the middle of the Pacific, people shouting Russian. And
oh my God.
It was like a dream to him.
Yeah. Because we were in the bottom bunk down below and we didn't even know any of that. But I do remember that many of the islands we wanted to go visit, we had to get permission from the Russian Navy, and we got denied 2 or 3 of them. We got to visit 1, 2, 3 islands, I think, 3 or 4. But there's tons. And it's kind of wild to think about, what do they not want you to see? What do they not want you to document?
Missile defense.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing is that we were a media crew going there.
Yeah.
That put everybody on high alert, and it's just, and you never know. You never know what they know about you in that situation. That's kind of a wild part of it, right?
Do you think they went through all of our because they confiscated all the equipment in Petropavlovsky when we tried to fly out, and Taylor had to go to Moscow.
Yeah.
Took weeks or more. I can't remember exactly how long, but do you think they just culled through all the footage?
I don't know. I do. And for context, for people who don't, it's a podcast and people don't know the full backstory, but basically when we finished that trip, we went on a boat from Kamchatka to Sakhalin, which is the kind of the island just above Hokkaido that's Russian owned. And it's sort of the end of the Kuril chain. We ended there, and when we were trying to all depart, right, basically they seized every piece of camera gear that was owned, that was larger than like a handheld camera. All the Reds, all the big drones, all the big lenses. I think it was like $250,000 to $300,000 worth of gear easily. And I remember, this is probably one of the most vivid memories in my memory bank was Renan. Stressed, looking at Taylor, literally like they're holding hands between the security screener.
I remember.
She can't go.
She can't go,
They decided that she had to stay because Renan had to go and do like a speaking assignment for Nat Geo. And I think you and me were like trying to, I was almost trying to act like I wasn't even with them because I knew I had just gotten my drone through and my cameras. And the last thing I wanted them to do is open up my bags because I would have had all my stuff stay too. And that was like one of the most dramatic things I've ever witnessed. Like tears, everything. I was just like, we were all sitting in the terminal afterwards, being like, oh my God.
It was hectic. It was crowded in a tight little space.
And we're like, did that just happen? Like, I couldn't even imagine Renan's feeling like just leaving, $250,000 worth of stuff. You don't even know if you're ever going to see it again.
And his partner.
And his wife. Like, that was a painful moment and kind of...
Incredible uncertainty. Yeah. Having the Russian government take all your stuff is filled with uncertainty.
Yeah. My experiences in that country have always been a little interesting.
Yeah, you got put in jail.
Yeah, I did on a previous trip to God, what's it called? It's on the other side of this Vladivostok. So yeah, I went to Vladivostok when I was early 20s, and I had a visa issue, and I basically got thrown into a holding cell for 24 hours and then deported to Korea. And it was a, you know, at the end of the day, it was a fine experience. Nothing happened, blah, blah, blah. But it was terrifying to have all your rights stripped from you, be interrogated for 6 hours, be thrown into a room with bars on the windows and the doors, and not fed, and you're on the phone with the U.S. Embassy. And it was dramatic, and I had never experienced anything like that. And I think that changed me in a lot of ways, that experience, for sure.
Yeah. Borders are terrifying. Borders really scare me.
Yeah.
They have different extrajudicial laws between countries. They're neither country necessarily. They have their own legal frameworks. Yeah, Rwanda-Congo border was really, really sketch. But actually what scares me more than any is the U.S.-Canadian border, which is kind of silly. But
dude, the Canadian border is gnarly.
Yeah, they're really serious about it.
It's kind of funny because it's either you are going to get fully interrogated or it's going to be the most chill thing ever.
I got put in a cell.
You did?
I got put in a cell. In Canada, on the border.
Which border, though?
Going north from Seattle to Vancouver, like the main.
In Vancouver, because I've always had good experiences in Vancouver, but it's Calgary that has been really tough on me.
Really?
Yes.
Dude, borders.
And you gotta, and we all kind of gotta laugh because we know that the American border is no easy experience for anybody. So it's kind of like that thing where you're like, oh, you know, borders have their place. I get it. But man, sometimes it's scary. Yeah.
And I think the Canadian border is, at least at the time I was arrested there, it was because Trump, it was right after Trump got elected, and they were trying to prevent Americans from fleeing. There was a fair amount of concern that Americans were just going to, that's at least what initiated a fairly intensive set of questioning. Yeah. But anyway, it's a whole...
They're like, are these all your belongings? Is this everything you have?
Yeah.
How long are you planning to stay in this country?
All of that, yeah.
It's so funny, though, because, like, was the Canadian government not wanting you to enter their country, or was it like the U.S. government not wanting you to leave?
Canadian government.
Okay.
Yeah, they're trying to protect Canada and their healthcare system.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I actually want to take this conversation in a different place, at least from the conversations we've had in the past.
Wonderful.
I'm really curious to talk to you first and foremost about faith, because I know that faith is an important part of your life.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Some people might know that on the internet and in the world, but it's also not super obvious that faith is really important to you, that faith has been a huge part of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to...
My wife's going to love this.
Yeah.
She's always, wanting me to, speak up about, kind of my thoughts and feelings around religion and its place in our lives. And I think it is complicated. So I'm stoked to talk about it. And I think that by talking about it, you kind of work through some of your own emotions around it, because I guess if there's any way to kind of put it plainly, it's like I have a complicated relationship with religion, and it is one of the most important things in my life, but it's also one of the things I understand the least. And I think that as time's gone on, I've learned that I understand it less. Yeah. Because I come from a place of having such a firm foundation of faith or a firm idea about what I believe. And then all of a sudden, as time goes on and you travel and you see the world and you're stuck in a border somewhere or whatever it is, or, there's Black Lives Matter movement, or there's, Me Too movement, whatever it is, these things, they shake the foundation of what you believe. And you're really looking at kind of the hierarchy of any institution and realizing that it is run by humans, and humans are so imperfect. And I think that what is so tough for me, being a Latter-day Saint, being Mormon, right? And I know I just kind of took like half of what you said and just started to run with it. So sorry about that.
It's okay.
But I will say, like, the biggest complexity that I have is that religion in its purest form is, to me, so beautiful. All religion that enlightens people to be better people, whatever that looks like for them. And usually it tends to look like some type of service, some type of uplifting somebody else, or utilizing your position to help to bring awareness, to inspire, to support, right? That, to me, that's like the purity of it. But the issue is that we get so inundated with I think what you see a lot, or I see a lot, is the culture.
Yeah.
And the culture is so pervasive, and it becomes something that is so, it changes ward to ward, city to city, state to state. And that's really complex for me.
And, there have been, at least maybe more within Catholicism, but there have been moral failings.
That, I've tried to really come to terms with what that means. And what it, and its place in my life. And maybe where it doesn't apply also, because and I know I just kind of took like half of what you said and just started to run with it. So sorry about that.
It's okay.
But I will say, like, the biggest complexity that I have is that religion in its purest form is, to me, so beautiful. All religion that enlightens people to be better people, whatever that looks like for them. And usually it tends to look like some type of service, some type of uplifting somebody else, or utilizing your position to help, to bring awareness, to inspire, to support, right? That, to me, that's like the purity of it. But the issue is that we get so inundated with I think what you see a lot, or I see a lot, is the culture.
Yeah.
And the culture is so pervasive, and it becomes something that is so, it changes ward to ward, city to city, state to state. And that's really complex for me.
And, there have been, at least maybe more within Catholicism, but there have been moral failings. There have been.
And there will be forever. Yeah.
Well, because humans are humans, and we're going to make mistakes, and our systems are imperfect. And it seems like religion, especially older religions, have filtered, despite all the imperfections, there's been an attempt to filter a value system through time, a sort of guide for an individual to, maybe act or behave in the right kind of way, given a novel circumstance, to learn how to move through life more gracefully.
Totally.
When did you first encounter the Mormon Church?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I grew up in a single parent home, just me and my mom. And I remember right around 7, 8 years old, I was going to school, just public school, and there was a kid that was a close friend of mine. His name was William Now. He's a Tongan kid, and he had this big Tongan family, 2 brothers and sisters. And being a only child, I was like, yo, I want to hang out with this big family and eat this awesome food. And just everything was loose, and we were just like always playing. And my mom was, busy working at the gym, and she was like managed a health club basically at the time, and Kennedy Fitness, whatever. And
how old were you?
I was probably 8, 7.
You were 8.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I wasn't born in the religion. And what happened was I started hanging out with that family. And on Sundays, like I'd be hanging out Friday night, Saturday, and they're like, hey, do you want to come to church with us? And I'm like, yeah, like I want to do whatever you're going to do. And so go to church. And I was like, this is awesome. And I think that so much of it was about what I needed at the time, which was I wanted stability. I wanted a family unit. I loved what the church, brought to my life regarding the importance of family, and I think when you don't have that and you come from a broken home, it's really appealing. And it still is all about family, and that's one of the core tenets that makes it so beautiful to me. But as time goes on, there are some pieces of that kind of the gloss wears off a little bit. But that was what introduced me to it. And I remember I asked my mom, I was like, hey, I would like to go to church on Sunday because I wanted to hang out with my friend. And
it's really interesting to me that you brought. Did your mom then become?
She wanted nothing to do with it at all. And so what was funny is she's like, well, if you're going to go, you should take the lessons so you know what you're getting into. And truth be told, like I had relatives that were LDS. I had like an uncle and a grandma and some people in my family. So I was aware of it, familiar with it. My mom was. But the funniest thing is that my mom, she had me when she was 16. She was like,
That's so young.
She left she like wasn't ever a member and didn't really go, but she like chose to not go and to not have religion be a part of her life. And because, she was having kids and partying and hanging out and living life and everything. And what was interesting was, and I love my mom for this, she was like, listen, if you're going to go to this church, we're going to go to all the other churches in town. So you can see because like if
cool.
If religion is going to be a part of your life,
make a good choice.
I want you to know what's out there, just so you don't have this one option because it's so cool, because you got a friend there, because there was like pizzas and cookies after, who knows, whatever. And so we did go to the other churches. We went to like Grace Bible. We went to whatever, these churches in my town. And I just felt this sense of kinship. I loved that like Boy Scouts is a part of it. I felt like there was all these things that I needed, this kind of fathering, that I wasn't finding there. And I wasn't finding in my life. And so we took the lessons. I joined. My mom joined as well, which was hilarious. And because, we both kind of felt inspired and felt moved. And I joined the church. And then oddly enough, my mom met my stepdad, Rob, greatest guy ever.
At the church.
Yeah, in the church. And it's funny because his story is really similar, like convert, later in life, had 2 young boys from another marriage. So, hodgepodge family. I'm 13. Now I've got a stepdad, 2 brothers, and then a younger half brother on the way. My parents got married, right? And it was kind of fascinating to go from like single parent, isolated kid to all of a sudden like full family, religion, the whole deal. And I think that in some ways that's kind of, on paper it all looks great and it feels good. But I think that's where some of the complexities started to kind of come out,
I just want to pause. It's just so crazy to me that at 8, you had that agency.
Totally.
To you as an 8-year-old. I mean, I think for most who experience religion as a kid, their parents bring them to religion.
Yeah, and I had no experience with religion as a kid outside of Easter on Sunday, like going and maybe saying a prayer. Like there was nothing. There was no I didn't know anything. It was
you're seeking.
Yeah,
you're a seeker at 8.
Yeah, I was, but I think full transparency. Like I just wanted to go to the church my friends went to, and when you're an only child and you're always looking for that person to play with or that thing to do. Like I was like, what, on Sunday I can hang out with kids my age and there's going to be cool activities they're going to do and they're going to get together on the weekdays. Like it felt like a club, and it felt like something I was in need of. And so, yeah, it is. I did have agency, but it wasn't, I think at the time, so much like I was seeking deep, meaningful understanding of the afterlife. It wasn't as much that. I think that it became that.
But you were seeking to fill a void.
Yeah, I was. And for sure. And there was a void at the time. And fast forward, 10 years or so, I'm 19 years old and I was hoping to go on a mission, but I couldn't go because I had made decisions that didn't allow me to go because they're pretty strict about your moral code. And I had chosen other things. And so I really, struggled with that a lot. And I think that as sort of time went on and I think it's always that reflection thing where you look back and you're like, why did I feel so lonely at this time in my life? Or why did I feel so, if I had the church and I had this and I had all these things that were supposed to I had the recipe book for happiness, but I wasn't happy, and that's always tough to kind of come to terms with. And I think that and I don't want to start, bagging on the church because it's actually not a church thing. It's a culture thing, where you have sometimes these families that are, and parents and moms and dads and whatnot, so busy holding callings or doing this and that they're the time that they could be spending with their own kids and building those own relationships aren't happening. And, I'm just trying now to make very different decisions in my life. To me, the priority on Sunday is not to be at church. The priority on Sunday is to be with my family, creating and cultivating real experiences. Because I'll tell you what, every single person, I'm not exaggerating, every single person who was my age that I grew up and went to church with is now a non-member. Maybe save 1 or 2. And legitimately, my friend group that I kind of went to high school with and whatnot, and all of them are gone. And it's fascinating to me also the relationship they have with their parents. And I would just say that, I'm really trying to think about how to do it differently, how to understand the place religion how it serves, a family and a group and whatnot. And I think that there's also the individual side of it. It's not all family related, but that's kind of why I came to it, was because of family.
Yeah, it's always been about family.
Yeah,
for you.
Yeah, that's literally the church's like slogan.
Really, I've never been.
Yeah, it's like trademark.
Yeah. I love that your mom eventually went and met your stepdad there, and that it became, it created the family you were seeking.
Yeah, it's wild.
That's a beautiful. Did you feel, or at what point, it seems like you've been a caretaker. Like you caretake for your family quite early, and that you have in your soul a sort of, I am a caretaker, I'm a provider.
Yeah.
When did you first feel like that? Like how young
It's a great observation. That's a great observation. I would say you're spot on. And honestly, I think that from a very early age, because I was aware, like my mom, did me the service of like being honest with me and trying to like not hide the complexities of like life. And I think also too, when you're seeing your mom date, and you're kind of like every dude that comes around, like, this could be my new dad. Like, it's a weird thing. It changes the way you think about and you perceive the world. You're kind of expecting or trying to be open to the idea that you're going to maybe love somebody and that you're going to trust them and all these things, like, as opposed to like just having parents and growing up with that. And so I think that she really allowed me to kind of like have that understanding. And I felt like, I just think from the very beginning, I was a caretaker, and I felt like that was a critical part of my role. And
it must have been so hard for your mom. I mean, I cannot imagine. I'm a new parent.
Yeah.
I'm 37.
Yeah.
And I have a wife and sometimes grandparents. And I cannot imagine being 16, having a kid, and then in your late teens, in your 20s, being a single mother. It doesn't make any sense to me.
And giving up like the opportunity to do so much in life because of that too. That's the other thing that I think was really tough for me, is as I got older, that caretaker mentality kind of wreaked a little havoc in my life, and it's
how so?
Just because I think that my decisions have always been less based on like, what's the best, what do I want? And more about like, well, how is this person going to perceive what I'm doing? And I remember when I decided to quit college at 19, I was going to junior college at the time, but I had incredible financial aid because I was the first person in my family to be able to go to college, and I had great grades, and my ethnic background gave me more financial aid. And I had received a scholarship. Anyway, I was in a good position to go to college, and I decided to quit. And that was like such a complex time between my parents and I, because
I'm sure they did not like that.
Not at all. And especially when I'm like, I'm pursuing this career path that doesn't exist.
Everything they sacrificed.
And that's the tough thing, is like, I knew that was exactly what their thought was. They weren't saying that, but like, I knew my mom had sacrificed a lot, and I felt that burden. And so it's kind of this thing that's interesting, where like caretaking is sort of the root. It's the upstream problem. It's the upstream cause. The downstream problem of being a caretaker is that you feel the need to prove yourself, because when you aren't taking care, or you aren't meeting the needs of the person or the thing that you feel like is part of your life's purpose.
Maybe, you're not living up to your...
Yeah, you overcompensate by feeling like, I need to prove myself. And I remember vividly, like, that was the single greatest driving force in my life to do what I'm doing now and be the very best and burn all the bridges that I had to, and whatever it takes. Like, it didn't matter, because the point was like, I'm going to be successful because I'm going to show my mom that her sacrifice is worth it. That's not, and I just have to say this, like, I'm aware now that that's not a burden I should have ever carried, but that's just what it was. Like, that's just the truth.
We're all really complex.
Yeah.
And we all have our baggage, and and sometimes there's positive attributes to them. Sometimes they're leveraged as powerful tools, and sometimes they create huge problems. Do you think there's an observation? There's actually a whole book written by Malcolm Gladwell called David versus Goliath that sort of analyzes there is a disproportionate amount of successful men in our culture who didn't have a father figure or lost a father. How do you think that affected you? How do you think that plays into the kind of determination that's required in this world to actually make it on your own?
I think it didn't really come to a head for me until I had kids of my own. And I realized, like, I don't know what this feels like. Like, I don't, like, you know, when you're putting your kid to bed and you're kissing them goodnight or whatever it is, I'm like, I don't have a memory of what that feels like. I've never experienced that. When, you know, and stepdads are probably to me, God's greatest gift to mankind, you know, or step parents, mom, dads, whatever, because of the selflessness that they bring in, the good ones, right? It's amazing. And I feel like so I just want to be clear that, like, I'm very privileged to have had a good father figure. But when they come into your life when you're like 13, it's a very different scenario. You're like already yourself. You're already who you are. You aren't going to change that much. And it's tough because there's a level of just like safety and kind of coddling and cuddling that is so crucial within the ages that, like, my kids are right now. You know, they're 6 and 9, or sorry, they're 9 and 11. And, you know, we're still best friends, but they're also becoming their own person. And so I really remember vividly feeling just inadequate a lot. And but to kind of get back to your question, I do think that one of the mindsets that sort of has come full circle for me in, like, what part did maybe not having a dad play in my success story or whatever that looks like. And I think that a part of it is kind of knowing growing up that there's not, like, that there's this person who's working to make ends meet, and then there's me, and there's nobody else. And there is not going to be a strong person to protect us. And so you have to become that person as fast and as soon as you can. And I think what that tends to do sometimes is shuts off your ability to be vulnerable or emotional because you aren't given as much permission to be vulnerable or emotional. And that's kind of what I feel like my 20s and 30s have been about, is like, genuinely, like, my wife's like, why don't you cry more? And she's like, why do you always cry when you watch a movie? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's hard for me to access certain things. And I feel like maybe
it could be dangerous.
Totally. You're allowing yourself to be susceptible to whatever it is.
The world's a scary place, and there isn't, you know, there isn't enough time necessarily in the heat of a very challenging family dynamic with money concerns to, like, kind of be woe is me, or to put the attention on yourself.
There was no, that's the thing. There was no time to feel sorry for myself ever. I never played that card. And even now, like, whenever I give a talk or presentation or do a podcast, I always feel so silly, like, even talking about, like, how hard my upbringing was, you know, or whatever. I mean, it's like, cause that's just not a thread of, like, that I'm used to kind of pulling on, you know. I've sort of pushed all that to the side. I'm like, we're going to make it work, whatever we got to do. And so it's a weird dynamic to think about a stepdad coming into your life and then what that provides you, because it kind of allowed me to, like, take a step back and all of a sudden have permission to find myself, I guess you could say, and not just be my mom's son who is there to make sure this family works and to be, you know, the best son that I can and to protect her. And, you know, and these things are so silly because what can I really do, you know, and 9-10 years old to protect
you brought your mom to the church and she met her stuff. I mean, you're already
it is kind of
participating in
it is kind of crazy to
making it work.
Yeah, totally. And, like, just being a good kid, like, you know, being a Boy Scout, getting your merit badges, getting good grades, not being a little shit like that. Those were things that I was, like, thinking about and just making her proud, you know.
But it can break people just the same, and it tends to break people more often than it makes people.
Yes,
by larger numbers for sure.
Totally.
Like, were there moments like that growing up, or were there times where you're like, you know, thank God I handled that situation that way, or thank God I have this voice inside me, or thank God I approach that dark moment like this, or like, did you ever feel on the brink of that, or or just there's something innate and you just have that?
I don't think I ever like dodged a bullet, so to say. But I feel like, if anything, what became a little painful was I kind of started to realize when this one person consumes your whole life, and it's just like you and them, and you're making food all the time, and you're like your weekly activities and your weekend activities are like, it's just you guys. And then you're sharing, you know, your person love with, you know, all these different people. I remember vividly being in high school and my mom, like, you know, somebody had seen me like smoking weed or something like that. And this was like, you know, after my parents had been together. And this is funny because this is a thought that I had had like later in life. My mom had like, you know, caught me smoking weed, and I can't even remember. Like, I think it was like the one or two second time I had ever done it or whatever it was. And, you know, we had this conversation, and it was just like super intense. And I remember feeling so remorseful. I'd let her down, all these things, yada, yada, yada. And as I kind of got older, and, you know, 10 years later, I was thinking back to that, and I was like, man, that experience really made me feel so jaded and angry, because when somebody is like acting out, and the answer or the response is to kind of like just kind of stifle what they're doing, like, this is wrong, you're doing this, blah, 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 you're setting this example, how, like, this looks so bad on me, which is a lot of kind of sometimes what I would hear growing up. And I remember being like, well, I was going through something, and that lack of desire to figure out what I was going through, to me, kind of showed where our relationship was at. And I feel like that was one of those experiences where I was like, okay, I need like I'm experiencing something in my life, you know, where I need some outlet, you know. I mean, you know, whatever, kids drink and smoke weed, it's just part of life, who cares? But the point being is, like, that was a opportunity to figure out and parent and get to know and like break down this kind of, you know, hey, like, let's talk about what you're going through, blah, blah. Instead, it was kind of met with more firm, you know, this and that, like, you know, consequences, the whole thing, which is fine too. But I guess there were these kind of markers in my life where I remember being like, wow, it's kind of time for me to move on from thinking that like me and this person are in it together, and I sort of need to figure out my own thing, because I can't trust them to meet my needs or be there for me when I need them, or to see and respond to maybe what I'm going through, or to acknowledge that, right?
It must feel pretty lonely.
Yeah, it was a lonely feeling. No, you're absolutely right. And spot on. And I think that this is, I just, you know, I have to come full circle here, but like, I sort of turned to like relationships, like, you know, and that's why I couldn't serve mission, you know, because I was, you know, being intimate and prior to going, which in the church is not allowed, right? So I think I sort of turned to, you know, dating and relationships and long-term, you know, girlfriends at a young age. And that was kind of like, I needed to feel protected. And I don't know, I've obviously done a lot of therapy around this and tried to process it.
You seem pretty well processed. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about that, but you know, it is so funny, because what you asked me, I had the privilege of doing Psilocybin about 2 years ago, and that was the number one thing that came up for me, was my desire to be a protector and my desire to kind of be a comforter, and sort of me breaking down why and what roles those play, because they sound so innocent, but they're not. You know, when unchecked and when kind of, you know, you pump it up to 12 or whatever it is, like, those things can, you know, manipulate relationships and make you a crazy person, I
Absolutely.
guess.
Yeah. My dad is that way. For his father, my grandfather was an alcoholic when he was young, and there was a lot of broken home dynamic, and that kind of thing can emerge. And so I understand both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
It seems like you also saw at the church. Like, you're saying that you saw maybe some bad habits in the eyes of the church, but you also in the absence of sort of parental guidance, at least to the degree that you
I was looking for stability.
Wanted.
Yeah.
The church was maybe providing a roadmap, a like schema.
Totally.
Like, here's how one should be.
Yeah.
And you were absorbing that.
I mean, I was drinking the Kool-Aid, and I don't say that in a bad way, and I still am. Like, I do believe that the church provides a roadmap for happiness. I think the hard part is how people interpret it, you know, and how people sort of, they put all their eggs into that basket, and they kind of forget that, like, you're still a human being with your own desires, and not all those are bad, and you don't need to, like, you know, give yourself whips and lashes because you know had a bad thought or a bad idea or whatever it is. Like, maybe just be more gentle to yourself, because I watch so many kids with that amount of pressure, you know, same pressure I had, like not being able to do the thing you wanted to do, go on a mission, whatever, and then just feeling the guilt that came with that, and witnessing kind of the family not do their part to sort of take away that guilt, but kind of be like, yeah, well, you know, you made some bad choices, and now here you are, now you're reaping the benefits, you know. And I think that's a really challenging place to be at a young age, you know.
How do you feel about the particulars of, I mean, there's some dogma, maybe is a term for, you know, not drinking coffee, not doing psilocybin, not having relationships out of wedlock. And how do you feel about those things now? I'm sure you've wrestled with, well, it seems like there were periods of your life. I mean, you're pretty, but from my perspective, I don't exactly see you even drinking coffee all that often. It seems like you've gone pretty long stretches
I'm
of your
definitely
life.
drinking coffee right now.
I know, but,
I love coffee.
It seems like in later life, you've relaxed on those.
I will say this. Because I think it's hard for me to sit here and say, I mean, it's almost painful to sit here and be like, yeah, you know, I'm drinking coffee and I've got, you know, more tattoos than I can count on one hand, and, you know, blah, 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 and all these things. Like, those are all challenging things for me to acknowledge, because the 12-year-old me, the 16-year-old me, the one who was, you know, crying into his pillow because he had, you know, said something or done something that was kind of against the church's rules. There is a part of me that still feels that guilt. And it's wild to me how, you know, I remember when I was seeking out like advice, therapy, what have you, that there's so much that I was kind of putting onto other people in my life, the relationships, my expectations of them, because if I'm living by this moral code, then they have to, and other people, and, you know, and not being able to relax. And I remember vividly the reason I did psilocybin is because my therapist recommended it. And I struggled with that so much. I was like, this is against the church and blah, blah, blah. And you know, this is a party drug. And he's like, dude, trust me. He's like, this ain't a party drug. He's like, you're not going to be doing this night after night. He's like, this is going to open you up in ways that you will not believe. Yeah. And it was recommended. And I sat with a therapist and I did it. And I kind of toiled with that emotionally, felt like I had to pray about it, and, you know, never asked permission, but it was just something that I did. And every choice that I'm making now in my life, where I live, how I treat people, my relationship with my kids, relationship with my wife, has been because of that experience. I would say it's the top 3 experience in my life: getting married, my first son being born, and psilocybin. Wow. Not my second son being born, because I've already seen one kid be born, so nothing new. But I would genuinely say, like, the reason I live in Iceland with my kids, the reason I uprooted myself so I could be closer to my family. And what's crazy is that, you know, on paper, maybe, you know, me 10 years ago was a more saintly dude, and somebody who was, you know...
Do you think that was helping you at that time to be sort of even more productive, more efficient, more dialed?
Totally, 100%. But I think the problem is like the weight that I was carrying
was too much.
Was so different. And I think that's the crazy thing, is that on paper, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was a different version of me. Now, I feel so much closer to my kids. Mm-hmm. I feel so much happier inside. I feel like I can legitimately give to others more because I need less, and because I feel less guilt and heaviness and weight for the decisions that I just, couldn't process, couldn't come to terms with. Why am I such a, a sinner about whatever it is, right? And it's changed everything in my life.
I'm a huge proponent and believer in psychedelic therapy.
Me too.
In its different forms. It's been really helpful for me as well with depression.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I know we've talked about it a little bit in the past, but
yeah.
And it's funny because I talked to so many friends about their experience, and that's kind of what gave me permission. It's so funny that I even feel the need to say that word permission, but that's kind of what you grew up feeling like.
Yeah. And culturally, the time we grew up, I mean, the war on drugs in the 70s was really reaching its prime.
It's crazy.
We were born in the 80s. But it feels like an ancient craft that was forgotten. I mean, I have this vision of the priests on high with the ancient pharaohs and the kings sort of guarding psychedelic substances for the purposes of healing. Imagine how much trauma existed in ancient I mean, can you imagine like how traumatic just the existence would have been?
Like I haven't
2,000 years ago
in 2 weeks. Yeah.
They probably guarded psychedelics as a means of healing.
Oh, completely. I feel genuinely like I owe my life, my relationship to it at this point. And I feel so lucky to have found that. And it's something that, I think once a year I try to recalibrate myself. I mean, that has been, and what's wild is like, I didn't do that and feel like I questioned God and questioned religion. Like I still believe in all of these principles. I just have such a different perspective than I did, 5 years ago. I have such a different appreciation for it. And that's the thing. Like you can still be all those things and still believe in deity and believe in religion. It can take a different shape. It can take a different form. It doesn't have to be what I think the culture of church and media has made it out to be. And
I was going to ask about the media. It seems like Mormonism gets a bad rap. I mean, it's generally true crime stories. It's on Netflix or a novel or something. It's all sort of like, here's crazy. This weird crime.
There's crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, it
misses like the value system, not just with Mormonism, across religion.
Totally.
It feels like the media is generally opposed to religion, and that feels like a little bit of a shame to me.
It is. I agree, because I do think that it's tough. The worst things on the planet that have ever happened have been in the name of God.
Yeah,
which
is why. Yeah.
And then I would also say that some of the best things, I love every person and their beliefs. I think that one of the things that is, having done psilocybin, kind of coming, full circle. It's funny. I don't think I've ever really talked about this publicly, having done that. But the thing that is the hardest for me to hear is somebody get up on the pulpit and bear their testimony, testimony is a beautiful thing. It's like you bearing your soul, telling people what you believe publicly. It's such a gorgeous thing that the church, like the chapel, when you go and you meet on Sunday, that you get to do on the first of the month.
Yeah.
But when people get up there and they say, "This is the one true church. There is no other true church," a part of me inside dies. I'm like, really? Like really? Like all over the world, all the religions, all the good that they bring to people's lives.
Why do you think all religions have that at such a core?
But they don't. That's the thing. Is not all of them. I don't think that like Hinduism and Buddhism are like, yo, we're the only ones that are right. You guys are wrong. Like I think.
Well, they did at different time periods. Like even Buddhism, was like warrior monks for thousands of years.
Exactly. And I think our modern day interpretation of those religions is very different than what they were. And I think that that's the other thing to keep in mind is like most religions became a religion as they fled persecution. These people banded together. LDS, faith is all about that. Handcarts being pushed across the West, the largest human migration of people ever. Not the Trail of Tears, Mormon immigrants.
What were they fleeing? Tell me more about the history, because I don't actually know this.
I'm the worst person to ask about history of church. Like, I'm not going to be like, yo, this scripture and blah, blah, blah. But basically they were basically in a very, very subtle, like surface level thing. As the church started to grow and an entire town basically would become one religion. If you're on the outside of that religion, you're like they're going to take over this town. They're going to take over
Yeah.
the politics of this town, blah, blah, blah. So they would be persecuted from town to town to town. You have this massive group of people that all believe in these certain things, right? And that's complicated, right? That's
becomes political.
It becomes
about
political.
power.
Yeah. And so then you would have mobs, then you would have people getting murdered, then you would have people getting killed, then you, whatever. And that's just that. I mean, that is literally the history of the US, right? And whether it's, you know, the Europeans doing that to Native Americans, or whether it's Europeans doing that to Europeans, or, you know, whatever it is, it's religious sects or groups or belief systems. So they migrated to Utah from like Ohio or New York or whatever it was. I mean, obviously this is kind of during the period of Brigham Young. And that's why they ended up in Utah.
1800s,
Yeah,
early
exactly.
1800s.
Well, 1830 is when the church was started, right? And so it was like later 1800s, but fleeing religious persecution, right? And whether you believe that being right or wrong, I mean, you have to appreciate, and you have to give pause and respect to the fact that there was so much conviction to pursue their religious freedom and their beliefs that they were emboldened to literally push handcarts through like thousands of miles.
I mean, it's similar to the founding story of America too. It's the same principles.
It's beautiful, and it really is. Like, and I think that despite whether you believe in what they believe or not, like I respect that massively, and I do feel a gratitude towards the fact that they brought this, they brought this west, and I think that's amazing. And just the more of the human spirit side of things,
It's called America's religion, or at least it's been coined America's. It's the religion that's sprung forth from America.
Right.
Do you think it's compatible with capitalism? Like, to me, it feels compatible with capitalism. It feels almost like a business religion.
That's the part that's the most painful to me. That, to be honest, like that's the part that feels the most complicated. And again, like I am not a church historian. I don't live in Utah. I only come here to ski and hang out with friends. But the business of religion, and I'm not just talking about my religion, just the business of religion in general is complicated. Mm-hmm. I mean, there isn't a religion in the world that isn't receiving funds from people. I would say that
there's more real estate in New York owned by the Catholic Church than anything else by orders of magnitude.
Right. Any religion, Judaism, Catholicism, Mormonism, like these are businesses. And I understand it because you can't have full anarchy. Everybody do your own thing, worship how you want. That's how you get sex and everything. It has to be organized, right? In order for it to kind of work. But within that organization comes this kind of dark side, which is that like, well, you're receiving, however
tithing,
however much money, or you have the other kind of religion where it's, and I really want to be respectful to how I say this, but it's sort of like a food chain where you're like, yo, you want to open up a church, you can become a pastor, and guess what? You can make this much money. The better you deliver your sermon, the more you'll get paid. Like that's kind of, I've, other times in life, I've sort of referred to that as like fast food religion.
Yeah, it's kind of like a multi-level marketing scheme, but instead of it being vaporware, there's like God at the center of it.
The bucket around, hey, they all have their imperfections. I get that. Like, this is why we're talking about this. And I think that is part of the dark side, is like knowing that like, well, they take that money and not all that money is just sitting in a bank account. Banks, and the way that, to make money grow, you have to invest it. That's what banks do with your money. That's what banks do with our money, right? Yeah. It's just how it works, right? So the banks want to get return. And so if you are pushing all this money into a church, they're not just automatically spending it. They're not automatically putting it into the mouths of hungry people or, delivering aid to Gaza or whatever it is. They are investing.
It's like the biggest hedge fund that's sort of dark in the country, I believe.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's not even so much that it's dark.
The Mormon churches. Or it's like hidden because it's, I don't know
what it is it's complicated because it's not public.
That's what I mean.
And I think that the part of it is like people aren't aware. They, you sign this check at the end of the month, you're tithing, and I've paid tithing most of my life, 10% of my earnings, right? And I still believe in the principle. Like, I believe that I have enough and that I give, and that's part of it. Like, I give back. And so the hope and the idea is that as a member of any religion, you hope that those tithes go to help your brothers or your sisters or, people that are in need, or families in the ward, or as an aid for something. And I will say this, like, I don't know a more transparent like tithing in the world than the Mormon church. They go to great lengths to kind of share where they put that money and
it's a well-run
share where
ship.
it goes. But in the interim, it's got to be stored somewhere. And it is stored in banks and it's invested, and that's complicated for some people. It doesn't feel super complicated to me. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
But it's tough when you're like, when you start to like peel back those investments, you're like, oh, they're investing in this and they're investing in that. And, it kind of be like
They're
that
big
thing.
in AI.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, who knows, but that's sort of the complicated thing is like, imagine, I'm just going to say this theoretically, but like imagine a religion where like they're preaching against this, but then like they're investing in that company that they're preaching against. That's kind of where it becomes complex.
Investing's really complicated like that in general, no matter who you are.
I look at my investments and I'm like, whoa, I invest in that?
Even just having money in a bank means your money is in the service of a whole bunch of things you probably don't believe in.
Exactly.
So it's tricky. But on the business side with Mormonism, it's partly all the things we're talking about now, but it also, to me, seems like there's an inherent industriousness to, I live in Salt Lake City, to the people.
Well, the beehive, you get that, right? Like the emblem is the beehive. And the whole point of that is like industriousness. Everybody is working together.
Like bees in a...
Yeah, like that's why you guys have.
It's not the ant mound.
No, it's not. It is a beehive, and the whole point of the beehive is that
I've never thought about that actually.
You've never? No. Are you kidding me? What's wrong with you, bro? Legitimately, that the emblem of Utah, and kind of like in many ways the mindset of the LDS faith is like to be a hard worker.
Yeah,
and
to help each other in business. There's a sort of
for sure.
Do you think, and a faith? I would argue in entrepreneurism, in it working out, in the future being positive and not in bad times leading to good times, and all that sort of faith element seems to have an almost business connotation.
It does. It's kind of I've never had anybody be like, yo, you should be an entrepreneur. It's not like that. I think it's just like you are told or you're kind of promised success. And it's tough because there's kind of a religious, there's a faith thread through it. Like you do these, you obey these principles, you blah, blah, you go to church, you pay your tithes, you don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't have sex before marriage, blah, blah, blah. You're going to find success. But then I think that inherently by not drinking and smoking and spending your money and you're constantly seeking out that next moral pleasure, you legitimately have more time. And what are you going to do at that time? Well, you're probably going to go to school, or you're probably going to join some, type of, industry, or you're probably going to, learn something. So I think that there's an industriousness, but that...
Or less brain damage, or less trauma from failing.
Yeah, is it the egg before the, type of thing? Like, who knows?
That's the value system thing where it might actually be a really good roadmap to being industrious. It
is a good roadmap.
It clearly is.
Truly, like
the evidence is in.
Yeah, and like the whole thing is like you build your day around the idea that you're going to like wake up, say your prayers, read some scriptures. You think about who you're going to help that day. Like this is kind of when I think about my sort of perfect day as a member of the church. Maybe it looks a lot different now than it did, but it was usually like, you wake up, you find 10 minutes to read your scriptures. You ponder on those. You think about how you're going to enrich somebody's life that day. You try to be loving and kind, and you try to apply all those principles. And beyond that, it's not like throughout my day I'm having to pray 100 times facing west or anything like that. It's not like there's any other expectations, really. It's really just structure. I think in the structure, as you said, it's like that's what kind of gives you this mindset that like, well, if I can dedicate myself to this very small thing, I can dedicate myself to something bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think this aspect has helped you in your business? Do you think, and also
totally,
it's subtle, but it seems like you incorporate this into your captions, not overtly. It's not like you're trying to convert people. At least I don't feel that way, but you're fascinated by light.
I would say for sure I am an optimist.
Yeah.
And I look at things optimistically, and I look at the world as a beautiful place. And like I said, I have no expectation for anybody to become LDS. I know how much it asks of people. And I would say that if there's one thing to really weigh out, it's like, is religion right for anybody? For you, what version of religion makes sense? To me, I just want to appreciate what I appreciate, which is that I think and I feel like there is a higher being, and that this world, and the way I see it, it's pretty simple, and this might be controversial to some, but I see that God is an artist, and he made this world for us to enjoy. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, this is it, YOLO, I mean it in the sense of like, to destroy this physical frame by filling yourself up with I guess you could say addictions to where you could never experience the beauty of the world. To me, that is against what I believe.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is the opportunity, and that can take so many forms. I mean, it can be, every single day I need a Diet Coke in my Stanley mug. It can be every single morning I need a coffee. Whatever that thing is, it can be cigarettes, it can be whatever it is. Whatever that thing is that kind of forces people to, I think, not be in tune with their feelings, not be in tune with maybe the world around them, to tune things out because it's a coping mechanism, and it's that little treat that makes us feel so good. Like I know that I'm kind of like straying off topic here, but I feel like, to me, God is in everything, and he is so merciful, and he is so incredibly loving, and he created this world for us to be able to appreciate and enjoy and love, and also to learn from and be very much at times upset, suffer from too. There is suffering too. I'm not going to just gloss over that fact, but I think that all of that is in some capacity for our learning and for our good. And, the suffering helps us decide where we stand on certain issues. The suffering helps us decide, how and why we want to treat our bodies or people around us or whatever it is. If we want to hurt other people, if we want to, bring people joy. And I would just say that, like, to me, that's what God looks like. And I look for that example in everything I do. And so I don't really like overtly try to, I'm not preaching to anybody.
But you're carrying it into there's a positivity, there's a levity, there's a grace in how you present yourself to the world, how you engage with others. Yeah. And I think it's generally all positive. Which in a social media context is rare. And a lot of your business is in social media. And
nowadays it definitely is a big part of my life. I think that you're spot on. There are many moments when I'm like, dude, I want to go off the rails on this thing. I want to tell people how, I have purposefully chosen to avoid certain things, like talking to people how my engagement is down, because you have people that just like, that's all they do is they just rant about how shitty this is for them and how hard it is to engage with people and blah, blah. And I just choose.
I've probably done that, which,
I've done it in private to friends, but it's not something that publicly I'm going to be like,
it's not a good thing to do.
Well, I just don't need a pity party.
Totally.
And I'm like, you know what? There are people in the world who do need pity.
Yeah.
And I am not one of them.
Yeah.
Like, I truly am not. Like, I am super lucky if I can. And I think that the mindset for me has always been, when I feel sorry for myself, or when I'm maybe mad about something some person said, or this is so stupid, but like me, like thinking like, oh man, that like digital artist created that photo and like everybody thinks it's real. And like, just like, I'm just giving the example of something so stupid because it's totally ridiculous.
I actually want to talk about AI.
Sure. But like, instead of like going off on a tangent, because I just think about like, will my negativity will that help anybody?
And there's a religious influence, because that thought doesn't necessarily enter into everyone's mind, especially on social media. I mean, people can be really nice in person, and sometimes people are just so mean on social media in strange ways that you're like, whoa, is that the same person?
I totally agree.
It brings out a certain quality in people.
Yes. Dude, I've been exposed to I'm not even the worst of it. And I let it roll off me. I try.
You seem pretty immune to it.
I'm definitely not immune. I mean, I have gone to bed in tears over certain things.
From the outside looking in, you don't. It's like you don't hit the hornet's nest. You don't sort of.
No, but I definitely don't mind getting into an altercation. I have no problem telling somebody how I feel. I have no problem telling somebody that I'm a real person. You're talking to a real person right now, and I would invite you that if you have something to say, write me an email, call me, schedule a time to talk to me. be a man or a woman and stand up for what you believe and say it to my face, because I am not going to create a space for you to grieve all the issues that you have with the way I do business or this. Like, I don't have time for that. And I don't care if that makes me lose a couple thousand followers, because I'm going to, I nowadays, I think there was a time when like I really wanted to placate everybody. And nowadays I'm like, fuck that. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Like,
you cannot please that for sure. That's an impossible task.
It's impossible.
You'd be like, I like the color blue, and people
fuck, you like blue, not green,
post,
bro.
Like, if you had a post like that go viral, people would be so...
I always love that stuff, but I think I've tried to take the high road too, and I've just tried to like let it go. And social media is tough, because we mentally, we're not meant to, I think you had shared something about this, like we are not meant to have that many opinions.
100%.
Same reason as why we, and I'm just saying people in general, and this is going to sound so insensitive, but we legitimately are not meant to know about all the issues happening in the world at one time. Never. I mean, when you think about the speed of technology and how much it's ramped up in the last 10 years, 20 years, all of a sudden, we know every single thing that's happening all over the world, every animal that's going extinct, the fires in Australia, the floods in Maui, everything, and we're supposed to address every single one and pray for everyone and donate money to everyone. And I'm not saying any of that's wrong. And if that's what fills you up,
but it makes people feel like it's the end constantly.
Well, and I think it's more than that. People look around with an expectation that you need to address all these things. And I'm like, you know what? We used to just know what was happening in our local community, and maybe we'd get some news from a slightly broader perspective. To me, I want to put my time and attention to things I actually understand. Do you know how many times I've had somebody reach out to me being like, you should support this and you should pour money in here, and it turns out to be some like jank like scam? Do you know how much I have to look into things before I share a link to Red Cross or whatever? Like, I don't have the time for that. I want to pour my time into things that I'm seeing in my own community, in the places that I love, working on preserving, glacial rivers in Iceland, or making the highlands so that extractive industries don't come in, because that's something I actually understand. I wrote a book on it.
Yeah.
I spent 10 years understanding it. And you know what? I don't know what's happening with climate change in Australia and what's going to actually make a difference there. Like, that's a bummer. But I feel like we should, if we all put our attention more focused in certain areas, we'd probably make more change. But what we're doing instead is we're just swiveling our heads back and forth, looking at everything, because there's so much coming in.
Yeah.
And that feels so dangerous.
It is dangerous. And there's a religious, traditional value system there too. It's like from within to family unit to community.
Yes.
And then maybe beyond. But that's the order of change making.
Yeah, I see that for sure.
Which isn't necessarily how there are worldviews that are opposite to that.
Yeah.
So it's...
and I respect that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love how you switch straight into religion, into like the heaviest topics. And,
I know. Well, I've never had that conversation with you.
No,
actually.
I appreciate it.
I've always been curious.
Yeah.
Because I don't have, truthfully, like I don't have that element in my life, and I'm curious about it. And I think other people will be too, because it's, especially within the outdoor industry and especially within the sort of social media context, it's
unpopular to be a religious person.
It's unpopular.
I get it. Yeah. I mean, it
or
is.
I don't know if it's taboo maybe, or it's, which I think is a little weird.
Right.
I do think that there's been a sort of replacement of religion by other things, false idols, you could say. Maybe even science to some degree.
It's kind of crazy, because to me, like, the biggest complexity with religion is the way that the church has supported the LGBTQ community. Did I say that right? Did I say that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just going to go straight in. Like, that's really painful to watch.
That's actually why I left Presbyterianism.
Yeah, I have so many friends that are part of that community, and I would never want them to feel like I don't support them or see them or understand them. I have family members, and it's like, to see the way that they've just constantly fumbled, it is painful. And this is kind of why I try to be very aware of how it makes people feel, and how it and the stance is taken. And I genuinely just believe that people can make their own decisions. And you know what? God can judge them however they want to. It's not my place. Like, I don't care.
Whatever works for you.
Whatever works. And I don't believe in a God that would ever like
be spiteful or
to one of his children. I don't see that. Like, imagine going around being like, ooh, I can't spend too much time with that person because they have different views than me. And like that, like that's kind of how I grew up, feeling like I had to pick and choose who I could be friends with and who I could.
It feels like that politically now, big time.
Dude, I know.
It's
I
like
hate politics more than anything on earth.
Yeah. Yeah, because of that.
Yeah, I don't want to talk politics.
Yeah.
Because I just like wish I could light a match on both sides and just like, I don't even, yeah.
Yeah, because the humanity is destroyed in the process.
It's just, like the ability to look at other people as if they're less than, without the context of like how they grew up. I mean, I know what it's like to grow up in a family that sees things differently, and I understand it. And I also understand another side because I've seen the world and traveled the world. And I was crazy. I was flying here from Iceland. I sat next to this guy, and he told me this quote. It was kind of fascinating. And it's probably somebody's quote, but we were just talking about travel and the importance of travel. And he's like, the most dangerous view of the world is the view from somebody who's never seen the world. And I was like, that's wild to think about, wild to really think about, how much that has enlightened my perspective. And I think that's one thing we all owe a thank you to social media, because it kind of does give us a view of the world.
Yeah.
It might not be real, but it is a view.
Yeah.
It depends on what you do with it. If you choose to let that make you concerned about everything and give you anxiety and stress about everything. Totally.
And we're addicted to our phones.
But I know you through social media. You and I have had real meaningful experiences together. Those experiences have enlightened my life. So I think that maybe it's this deep religious perspective where I'm like, I choose to be optimistic. Like all of my closest relationships have come from social media. I choose to focus on that. I choose to think about that. I choose to think about how it allows me to enrich others and they enrich me. And so I think it comes down to a perspective thing.
All things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which awkward question should I ask now?
I know, exactly. I'm like, okay, segue.
Yeah.
Advocacy. I'm gonna pivot into advocacy for a sec. I was gonna kind of bring this into the salmon, open net salmon story.
Yeah.
I just saw the documentary.
Oh, cool. I'm so glad. Yeah.
A few weeks
Salmon
ago.
Nation by Patagonia, the one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good.
It's painful. It's powerful.
It's powerful. And I would say there's very few documentaries like that have actually changed my behavior. And I immediately I'm going to buy wild salmon.
Dude, 100%. Me too. So full transparency, I own some property in Iceland, and where I own property is legitimately where they filmed a large portion of that film, where the open net salmon farming is happening. And it's in a fjord, absolutely beautiful white sand beaches and crystal clear water. And I have seen what that has done to the water. We have seen what it has done to the wild fish population. And I think that the issue here is that open net salmon farming, which is so complicated, because when you're buying food, you're at a restaurant and somebody's like, you're like, oh yeah, Norwegian salmon.
It's 70% of the global salmon demand.
Yeah, and it is so bad for the environment. The fish are filled with basically like pesticides to get the pests off them, sea lice. The sea lice gets so bad that it mutates their flesh, eats them alive. And the reason why is because natural fish are meant to be in the sea and go upriver. And when they're in fresh water, the sea lice fall off. It's natural for salmon to have sea lice, but salmon is a cornerstone, keystone species. They are the only species in the world that goes and gets ocean nutrients, carries them up to 80 miles, I think more than that, upstream to deliver them and basically to bring them to a riverbed. It is fascinating. Like I have, there is no more animal that I have more respect for. And to see what happened, basically why this film was created, was because there was a massive, basically a massive leak of the wild.
It's like a deep sea oil leak, basically.
Yeah, it's basically like the net opened up and a bunch of these mutated fish that are never supposed to intermingle with native fish got out. Like 3,000. They don't even really have the actual numbers, like thousands and thousands. And so basically they're swimming upriver. They're trying to breed with native fish. They're potentially they're taking up breeding space in, the river. They are potentially threatening and harming, they are the wild population.
They're almost ending the wild. Like
that's the bigger issue.
Almost, and Iceland as an island is vulnerable to
super vulnerable
permanent ecosystem change.
Exactly. And this is one of the most vibrant fisheries in the world. One of the only places where you have, strong, healthy numbers of wild Atlantic salmon.
Because everywhere else, this has already happened.
This is exactly. And, look at Patagonia, you look at Canada. I mean, luckily, a lot of these places have changed policy, but this is one of the dirtiest practices happening in the world. And I'm ill-equipped to speak on how eloquently my friends speak about it and the issues. The complicated part of it that I see and I understand is that there are these small towns with these very vibrant people, and these towns are in need of jobs, and they're in need of income, and they're in need of money. And it is a complicated narrative because basically the open net farming does bring in jobs, but it has been very distorted how many. You have oftentimes, maybe the need of a lot of people to help build these things and put in the infrastructure. But then when they're actually being run, it's like 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 jobs. And that's it. And a lot of these jobs are going to Eastern Europeans who are coming there to work and leave. Yeah. And so it's not even, and so this is kind of like this pervasive, complicated political thing where like those companies are coming in, they're supporting the local soccer field, they're buying the new gymnasium, they're like buying up these towns.
Whatever it takes to have the politicians be on their side. Whatever it takes.
And I think that this film, it advocates, and I think what everybody is hoping for is like, hey, we get it. People need to eat. Salmon is important. I understand that the answer is not to just eat wild salmon or to not eat salmon at all. I get that. Like, this is 2024. Like, we need to feed people. And
that's the thing that's hard with it. There is demand for the fish, and
they're realistic. They're like, all you need to do is move this on land. You have no sea lice. You have a totally controlled environment. No salmon will get out. Like, I eat land farmed salmon. There are Icelandic companies that are doing land farmed salmon. And the thing with that is like, I want to support them because I want those companies to thrive. Personally, I'd rather only ever eat wild caught salmon, but it's not always available. But the point being is that we want to take this dirty practice because it's cheap for them to do it in the ocean. That's the issue. See, for them to move it on land, it will cost them money, these companies. And that is
the with scale, costs might come down.
100%.
Niche industries cost a lot per unit. Exactly. Unit economics change immeasurably when things become industrial at scale.
Yeah.
I wonder, the thought that comes to my mind, I've always had a bit of a critique with the environmental documentary genre, the sort of Patagonia genre, because they focus on problems beautifully and they demonstrate problems.
Right.
They very rarely focus on solutions or celebrate solutions.
That's a good point.
Or make the protagonist the solution.
I totally agree. This is kind of why, for me, I have a really hard time, and I respect them, but with Sea Shepherd and like what they do, it's like, when there was a documentary Vice did about the Faroe Islands and the Grin, which is like the big whale killing that they do there, right? And regardless of how you feel on that, in this documentary, I remember Pamela Anderson went to the Faroe Islands to speak on behalf of the importance of whales, and people were sitting there, and I'm going on this little tangent, but it was so interesting because she was doing a conference in the Faroe Islands. You have this culture that has lived in these 14 jagged islands, disconnected from everything for thousands of years. And she's telling them about how bad this practice is and how they need to have alternatives and blah, blah, blah. And people are like, what do you want us to eat?
Yeah,
do you want us to ship Nabisco products over from mainland so that we can all get diabetes? Because that's what's happening in Greenland. Because they can't eat their native diet. Because imagine this, not every person is meant to live and eat in California where you can get everything you want at all times perpetually. Is that even healthy? It's so complicated to me, and I feel like having gone there and seen that place and seen how they treat this food, which is food, like I just
see the cultural context.
Yeah, like I get it, I see it. I don't know how else to frame it. Yeah, and somebody stood up and they're like, and they in this documentary, and some local, and they were like, "You're a terrorist. You're a terrorist on our waters, like, basically trying to inhibit us from relying upon a food source that's not declining. It's just people don't like the way it is being done." And I think that visually the optics of it are terrible. But what should we do? Should we corral them all into a massive field in inland California where nobody wants to see them, and put all our put all our animals there so we can slaughter them. Because when you drive on the 5 freeway, what do you see? You see just, dairies everywhere, right? And cows everywhere. And all of those are ending up in your food. Do you think those things live a optimal, ideal life? No, it's like the shittiest thing in the world. I just like, to me, the fact that somebody deemed certain animals sentient and beautiful and other ones not is just fascinating.
There's 9 billion people on the planet, and
I can't get around it. Yeah.
How do you think, like, I creatively would like to make films and stories that celebrate solutions.
Yeah.
It's difficult creatively.
Yeah.
It's almost not as, maybe it's just not normal for the genre, but it almost seems challenging to have the hook.
Right. You're spot on. It's almost like by focusing on the issues, they can rile everybody up, but then you kind of leave everybody without any, with blue balls. Basically, it's like, what's the solution? Well, in the Patagonia film, they did talk about land farming, but I do think that they could have gone deeper. There could be more options, talking about what other jobs could come, talking about how this could impact local communities, really diving deep. And I think this is more of the issue, is that you have films like Damnation. And I feel bad that we're kind of just, talking only about Patagonia films here. But I will say, like, you see a film like Damnation, which is talking about dams in America and dismantling them and whatever. That film kind of shows both perspectives, the solutions, the blah, blah, blah. It's a 50-minute like feature length film. The issue is that when you have these like 20-minute films, these 15-minute films, you can't really dive into the nuance, and I think that's part of the problem, is like underfunded, kind of like, let's throw this money at it. Like, how do we tell these cool, captivating stories without maybe diving into all of the nuance? I will say that that in Iceland, when I went to the premiere, they had an amazing panel of Icelandic environmentalists and people who are, people from the government, people. And so there was a discussion and discourse happening around how to solve this. And that was really beautiful. And I think the cool thing is we are talking about a very small country. Like, everybody globally can decide to not eat this kind of salmon, but within the country, that's where the decisions have to be made.
They can decide whether they want to protect
and
their
I do think there
country.
was a lot of effort that they put into making the right people be heard and making their voices amplified. And there was a ton of media there, and that media is going to spread out. So I will say that there was that. I think that in the film context, it's tough because, again, without the time and the budget and the massive thing, massive project where you're really going to pour into this like a year's worth of work or more, I don't know that you're going to get all those solutions that you're hoping for.
It's really hard. Yeah. Just to tell a solutions story. Cause I feel like a lot of solutions come from technological progress, which is sort of a business thing.
Yeah.
Policy, regulatory changes, which is really arcane and kind of in the backwaters of government. And it's really hard to make protagonists and heroes of the thousands of little changes that advance towards a better outcome on big picture issues.
Totally.
And we just forget about all that.
Yeah.
We sort of don't have visibility into it.
Yeah.
And then we just think, I personally think that people perceive the problems to be permanent and unchanging and not progressing or not getting better.
And they're like, well, it's already gone this far. So, I mean, what can we do? And the other issue being like, well, there's just bigger fish to fry. There's bigger issues in the world, and that's super tough. But I think that's kind of the issue, is that if these things go unchecked too long, they become an issue that you can't fix, you can't change, you can't solve. And that's complicated to me.
Yeah, when there's permanent change.
Right.
Like AI, moving into AI.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you actually scared for AI?
No. That's a great question. I get asked this a lot, and I'm like, first of all, I haven't personally used it. I've had a lot of friends that have used it, and I've inadvertently used it with campaigns and stuff that we've done where we've had to make like a movie poster or whatever it is. But I've never like typed into the thing. But to me, what you're kind of asking is more like, do you feel like it's going to negate photography and artists and steal jobs? Is that yeah. So I absolutely feel that there will be a time very shortly where brands, maybe not like the Apples and the Toyotas of the world, but I think that like brands will not need to hire a photographer to go shoot a catalog. I just don't think it's going to be a need, or they're going to be able to create 90% of what they need through AI generated images. That's just what is going to happen. And so, like, I look at this the same way that I look at the digital camera revolution, where all of a sudden, when I was shooting film and digital cameras started coming out, and the question I was always getting was like, do you feel threatened by the fact that everybody has a camera now? And I'm like, well, is everybody a storyteller? Is everybody investing the time into going out and creating those stories? I think nowadays it's the same thing where, like, yes, you can generate amazing work in AI. It's only going to get better. That's a given. It is going to take over some parts of the job. And you know what? If pharmaceutical advertisements can get taken over by AI, I don't care. I think that, to me, back to your point, storytelling, deep and immersive human interaction, conversation, trying to make myself more available as somebody who is doing public speaking or writing books or authoring books or sitting in a podcast or teaching or instructing or sharing or trying to actually create art as a means of living is probably where, to me, this is like pushing me more.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there are certain parts of, like, my job will be affected. Like I know I'm being optimistic here, but I genuinely see, like, I will probably lose money throughout the year because AI might take some of that. And I think that that's just going to trickle down to everybody for sure. But what I'm saying is it's forcing me to think more about what can I offer that it can't. And if I just imagine a fantastical world right now where AI does do all of those types of, all that type of work, what type of work would it not do? Like, is it going to compensate for a conversation, or is it going to take the place of a conversation between two people who have seen a ton of the world and had really crazy experiences, and where you want to listen to them and you want to maybe, hear about their perspective, or about how religion is, like, been a really complicated part of someone's life. I don't think I care about hearing what AI has to say, because AI has no experience. Whether it's going to provide us the answers of how to solve world hunger, maybe, I don't know. But I think that the human being will always be interested in hearing the human being, and this is why long form podcasts have been and become so popular.
I agree.
Like, I sit and listen to people talk for 2-3 hours and I'm like, I'm enthralled.
Yeah.
Like, so I guess telling stories is at the core of what I feel like I'm called to do. And that takes the place of many things. Maybe there'll be situations where brands will rely upon AI for all these other needs. And maybe that means they'll have more money to do compelling actual projects of people in the field, or some kind of social issue or something like that. That's kind of my take on it a little bit. It's scary. There is so many unknowns. I don't want to paint a picture like everything's going to be cool and we're just going to be good forever. But I guess I'm trying hard to grip onto that optimism.
Yeah, no. And as we've talked about, as you do, like, as is innate to your being.
I don't know any other way to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there will be a premium placed on authentic.
Yeah.
I'm worried personally that there's already a sort of winner take all dynamic within our economy, within algorithms, and within just capitalism, that there's a sort of accentuation towards winners, which is, I don't know, choose a different term, but that this will further accentuate that, because people who are known or have some amount of notability, or who people resonate with,
right,
will be very valuable, even more so in an age where there's fake generative things, because it'll feel different. It'll be maybe even subliminal.
Well, to me, the more scary situation is people wanting to spend all their time, or being able to spend all their time, wearing VR glasses,
goggles,
or VR goggles,
yeah.
and
so
accepting that is I'm just going to put it straightforward, like, that's a better life. What they're seeing within those goggles and what they're feeling within those goggles. And I will tell you this, mark my words, it's not going to take long before that experience is actually fully immersive, where it's smell, and it's not just sight and hearing, but it's taste and it's touch. And once you have captured the entire visceral experience, there will be no need to leave. And it will be really hard to leave, because right now it's capturing just a couple of them. And we know how addicting phones are. Imagine when you can taste and you can touch. Imagine, like, that will be so challenging. And to me, I think that's the greater fear, is that people would rather be there than in reality. And you know what really sucks is there are certain people who are in really tough situations in life, and that might be a better existence.
Yeah. But it's scary. I mean, it's Ready Player One style, and
it is Ready Player One style. That movie is a heavy one, you know, to be honest.
How do you think about all these things with respect to raising two boys, your kid? Like, well, first of all, simpler question to start with. I mean, do you allow your kids on social media? I assume you do to some degree.
I don't allow them on social media, but I do allow them
at all.
At all. I mean, they don't have Instagram or anything like that. I allow them to play Pokemon Go a little bit.
Do they have iPhones?
They have iPhones, but they have iPhones because they have total freedom in Iceland to like ride their bike to school. I mean, that's why we moved there. It's because it's the safest country in the world, and they have their childhood back, and they have autonomy, and they get to like go. Their iPhones are totally parentally like locked down,
controlled,
everything. And actually the parental controls on phones are fascinating. It's awesome. My kids aren't like obsessed with their phones, which I love. They're not like, you know, at the end of the day. But the cool thing is like, that's how they're able to communicate with their friends, you know? And I think that that's important. Like they need to be able to text their friends and call their friends and make plans. And I want to empower that independence. The only thing we let them play is Pokemon Go, only because they get to do it with friends. And it's like, you only get to do it when you're with friends. We don't own any gaming systems. We don't have any of that, but we're never so rigid that we're like, well, if you go to a friend's house, you can play, because that's the way that their friend interacts. And that's the way that their family allows, you know, what they allow in their home. And it's not my job to control that part of their life. The way I see it, it's really simple. It's like, I tell my kids, like, you need to be involved in something, whether that's right now they're in jiu-jitsu and they're going to ski club. And it's like, if you're active every day of the week, doing something after school, whether it is, you know, again, playing football or this, that, then we're good. Like it's, if you want to spend some of your free time after other things are done, you know, playing with your friends, playing Pokemon Go or going to your friend's house and playing video games, I don't mind, you know?
Yeah.
That's kind of the way that I feel like there's gotta be. And I think that the key thing is you just have to be involved enough to where, you know. And I realized growing up that so many of my friends that were just total, like the kids who didn't maybe turn out, you know, ideal. It's just the parents weren't involved. They just didn't even know what they were doing. They had no idea. And I think that's a part of it. I try to know. I try to be aware. It's wild texting your son. Like it's wild texting your kid. I now have this relationship where I'm like, I kind of love it, because before I would like text my wife, text Bree, and like send them a video like, hey, I'm here, and try to be, you know, but now I send it directly to them, and like I get to talk to them. Like
it's so crazy.
I feel closer to them though.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Technology has provided that. So it's this, I mean, I'm not providing really answers here. I'm just saying like it's a challenge.
But how did they feel? Did they have a hard time? I mean, you're quite online, obviously, for your business and your life. And I feel like if I message you, you're going to respond within a day. Yeah, generally.
I don't let my text like I can't. I'm one of those people who like my inbox has every email read.
Right, which I assume with the volume of messages you like, that's a feat in and of itself. But how do they feel about not using social media, seeing how you use social media? I mean, maybe when they were younger, maybe they couldn't quite understand some of the nuances there. Right. Are they starting to
Totally. They get it. Like, I mean, they get it. Cause like I'll share a video of my kid and they'll be like, oh, I want to see that, you know? And they'll be like, what does this person say? And like, and they'll see that stuff. And part of that makes me like cringe inside and die a little bit. And then the other part of me is like, well, I don't know, you know, to be honest, like it's something that I try to separate from them. Like I don't want them to see me on my phone, and I've made it a point to be like, if I'm going to use my phone, I just tell them, I'm like, I'm here, I'm going to be working right now. I got to work right now, guys. And just so you know, like me using my phone is allowing me to be here remotely, or I can go and use my laptop. Right. So I try to be very straightforward about like that. And I try not to be complacent with just like randomly scrolling. Like if I need a second to go and whatever, I'll just go into the bathroom, I'll go into the bedroom, or I'll remove myself, because I don't want to be in front of them just, you know what I mean, zoning out. But it is complicated. It's complicated because my biggest fear, and I see this so much with just kids in general, is that at a certain point, you know, every person wants to like curate their life based upon this perception that online they're a more interesting, more unique, more whatever version of
Create
themselves,
an image.
whatever it is, make an inauthentic, thing. And I just really, I don't know how. I'm trying to figure it out to empower my kids to just be their most authentic self.
Is it an internal validation versus external validation thing? I mean, it seems like the whole construct of social media is external impetus, external stimulus.
Well, and I understand that. And I think that I think why it bothers me so much is that I know what it's like to be a young artist who's having your work critiqued, who's being criticized, who's hearing no. And nowadays, it's as if people want to skip that part and go straight to the validation. Yeah. It's almost as if to be a photographer in 2024, you have to get an Instagram account, then buy a camera, then figure out how to use it. And I feel like, I see people online a lot, and I kind of like, I feel like to me the veil is just pulled back. Like I can tell how sensitive people are because I see the way they talk about it, and I'm just like, man, like if you were working in the real world, and I'm mostly gearing this, what I'm saying, towards more of influencers and not people who are maybe having to put their portfolio in front of, art buyers or agencies or whatever it is, like you would not survive because it is harsh. And if you aren't good, you just aren't good enough for what they need. And I have heard that many times, and I have still hear that all the time. And I bid on jobs that I don't get all the time, and somebody else gets it. And I guess what I'm saying is like, when your kind of all of your art is based in this kind of call and response format, where it's like I put it out, I receive support, I receive love, I receive pat on the backs, and there's never any critique. I just wonder where the growth comes. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, totally. It's external. External validation is a pretty unhealthy. Because it can work for a time, and then all of a sudden
it needs to be both, right? How do you find both?
Well, that's kind of what I'm asking you as a parent. As a parent,
I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna
still
give my kid a social media account. I'm like, dude, that sucks, bro. No, I mean, I think that's my biggest fear is seeing how people their personalities kind of are online, and just wanting to ensure that my kids don't adhere to that model of like constantly seeking that. And I think the point I'm saying is like, I know it's important to find validation in other ways. That's, I think, the recipe. And that's what I've found is like, I feel like that was crucial for me, and I really want them to find it in other ways. Yeah. Right? It's important. What works for them. Yeah. I mean, it can be a million different ways, but it's just important to find something else. It can't come from me as their dad. It can't come from like, a girlfriend. It's got to come from like a peer or something else, and which is why it's so cool to like make something physical and show it. Like when you show a film, people are coming to your film, you're there in person. You're not just putting something online. Like you're going to see people be either disinterested on their phones or whatever it is, or maybe they're enthralled by what you're saying. Like that's the one thing about, I think, public speaking that I've really been fascinated by is like, you're on. And there is an energy exchange. And I don't say that lightly because I hate that word. And my wife knows I hate it because I don't like the frou-frou-y conversation, but like there is an energy exchange. You are feeding off of this group of people. Yeah. Whether it's 5 people or 500, it is a very vulnerable experience where you're up there and you are feeling a critique in real time. Like you don't need to tell me if I blew it. I know. And I think that is, and when you're on social media and you can edit and perfect it and put it through whatever you want. Focus groups. Yeah, it's like focus groups before to see if it performs. And that's what's so silly is like a lot of the commercial work that might go. It's like it is going through a focus group. Like they've already decided this campaign is going to be successful. And I think like how do we get back to that just more that rawness? Is this part of your impetus to bring your family to Iceland, like how you want to raise your children? Yes, 100%. I mean, I wanted my kids to have an upbringing like I had, which was like full of riding your bike until like coming back at sunset, and this and that, and just, being in a community, I guess you could say. I don't know how else to put this, but I really, really, really worked hard in my 20s to the point where like friendships weren't a thing. Family was barely a thing. I'm talking about like my distant family, right? It was just like my wife, my kids, and work. And health wasn't even really that important to me. And I've always related this to this idea of the parable of like the 4 burners, where like you have 4 burners on a stove and you need to choose, health, family, work, and relationships are all a burner, and you have to turn off one to be successful. You have to turn off two to be really successful. And I feel like I turned off 2. And so I guess what I'm getting at here is that like I realized that I needed to just make a change and just change my the way that I kind of viewed work and the relationship with that. And so I think that my 30s, I'm 37 now, I'm gonna be 38 in like 2 weeks, have really been about trying to make up for that time where I think that work was the most important thing. And I mean, I talked about this earlier, but that's kind of the most challenging part of it. And I know that like in California, life was so good and so easy, and had this killer ranch and these alpacas and this awesome house that we remodeled.
What happened to the alpacas?
They're still there. We have a ranch hand that helps them out. And we moved to Iceland, not because it was easier, but because, or even better, but because collectively we all felt like we wanted a change and we didn't feel like the growth was happening. I mean, that's obviously my wife and I making that decision, and the kids are having to go along with it. But that was why we made that. That's why we moved.
Are they learning Icelandic?
Totally. They know more than me.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane. It's amazing.
In school, do they only speak Icelandic?
Yeah, literally. Like it's crazy because Icelandic is one of the hardest languages to learn.
Yeah.
It is so challenging. The Germanic root in
Just
general.
The noises the mouth makes.
I know. The rolling of
make.
the rolling of like the P's and the THs. It's like Spanish on steroids when you're trying to roll. It's so hard. But the thing that's fascinating is I didn't realize this is like for me to go there, for tourists to go there, Icelanders are so accommodating with English. It's incredible. And English is obviously like, I heard the funniest thing where somebody said like English is like the poison language because it like poisons a culture. And it's funny because it kind of like, because English comes in and then English takes over a little bit. And so I guess what I'm saying is I really appreciate that they're learning, but I never fully realized that for me, learning Icelandic is fun. I get to learn it and I get to be a part of the culture. For them, it's survival. If they want to form lasting friendships, they have to learn it. And if they want to be able to do well in school, they have to learn it. And so I guess what I'm saying is I'm asking a lot of my kids, and they've been rising to the occasion. I've been really impressed.
And they're at a point in their lives where their brains are developing mostly in the context of social relationship.
Yeah, totally.
That like I always have this image in my head of that age sitting in, whatever it is, an algebra class, and there's, algebra being taught, and like 1% of their brain is on that. And 99% of their brain is like, does that person like me?
Yeah.
What I feel this certain way about that girl.
Totally.
And it's just
it's the social dynamic.
That's like how the brain is evolving at that point.
Yeah.
So with language, that's got to be.
I mean, I cannot even fathom how hard it would be to like make that change, uproot yourself from everything be in a different culture with different, even just the way that people respond to jokes, and even just the way that people like, their mannerisms are so different. And as a kid, I guess in some ways, my hope for them is that they just get introduced to a different way of thinking and a different way of seeing the world, so that when they get older, they can make a choice. Because I didn't really have that choice growing up. And I just wanted to provide them something new and know that like, hey, the US is great, but if you don't believe in this type of a system, you could also embrace this type of a system. Or if you want something different for your life, this is here for you. And I guess that's what we all hope, is like to give our kids something more than we had, So this is my version of it. And I don't know if it's right. I'm just trying to see what'll happen.
I think it's beautiful.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It comes with its challenges for sure. But I will say that like I feel closer to my family now than I think I ever have. And that's been a real privilege. And, the culture really does support like families, which is rad.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you probably got to catch a flight back to Iceland.
I'm flying to California for a day.
You're flying back to California.
And then we go see Dune 2. And then I fly to Iceland.
I cannot wait for Dune.
Me too.
Oh my God.
It'd be cool if we were doing this in the theater, like while we were watching like live commentary of Dune 2.
I just cannot wait for Dune.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, Chris, this has been great.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for making time.
Appreciate it. I appreciate the thoughtful questions. And I there's not many podcasts I do where I genuinely feel caught off guard in a good way, where it makes me think and it makes me like want to workshop things in my head a little bit. But this is great. And I honestly feel like these are the things that are genuinely on my mind and my heart all the time.
Thanks.
And so I just appreciate the questions and the thoughtfulness.
Yeah, I try. No, this is great. I hope this helps people. And, I hope people think a little bit about religion and about family and about mindset.
Yeah.
Because I think all those things are what can lead people to a happier, healthier life.
And about psilocybin.
Which also can do wonders. Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.